Here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about the budget process and timeline. I'll talk a little bit about the impacts, obviously, of this pandemic on what we're doing. And then we'll go right into the proposed budget. And the focus, I know for many folks, is what exactly are we going to cut? Anticipated service reductions. And then we'll go right to your questions. So first, here's where we are in the process. In the middle of May, we've got several public meetings. And then we have just completed some budget study sessions with the council. Those are also public. And then we'll have additional public hearings that will be more formal with the council present on May 21st. I'll release the June budget message in a few weeks. We'll have a hearing on that will also be public with the whole council on 15th. And then council will consider that June message on the 16th, and we'll finally adopt it in June. So the way the year works, the calendar year for the city is as it is with most government agencies. The fiscal year ends on June 30th, and then a new year begins on July 1st. So all this is in preparation for the July 1st budget year. Okay, so obviously pandemic is having a devastating impact on our community in many ways, and our budget is no different. It certainly has demanded a whole new set of responses from the city. That means a lot of resources have been rededicated, and the most important resource we have is the time of our city employees, their time and energy. After all, we are a service organization, and we are about people, powered by people, and that means a lot of folks have had to put down whatever they were doing, if they were in the finance department or they were working in the libraries. And now we've got, for example, 160 employees whose job it is to ensure we have distribution of more than 2.5 million meals every week throughout neighborhoods and throughout our county. And we're doing that in partnership with a lot of folks, including the school districts and Second Harvest Food Bank and others, but it takes a lot of coordination and creative thinking to scale that appropriately to the need. I'm grateful for how city staff have really stepped up. We've recognized, obviously, with so many families without paychecks, very basic necessities like baby diapers and wipes and formula are also necessary to be distributed. So more than 7,500 families are recipients of some of that aid. We fundraised, really grateful to Jen Loving for her leadership and the generosity of folks like Chuck Robbins, who's the CEO of Cisco, donated millions of dollars. We've now raised more than $25 million to help struggling residents, but it's not anywhere near enough. We know much more is needed given the scale of need just created by the fact that so many of our neighbors are employed. We have really had an incredible outpouring of support from the community in terms of volunteering. More than 3,300 volunteers have signed up on SiliconValleyStrong.org. Let me repeat that again, SiliconValleyStrong.org. That is the one-stop shop you can go to either give or get help as you are looking to either give back in the community or if you need assistance with anything from food distribution to finding out ways to support your the learning of your children while they're obviously not able to attend school, or if you're looking for small business assistance, or if you're looking for ways to get tested, for example, and free tests. All that information is available. SiliconValleyStrong.org. We provide quick links to get you to the right sources to address whatever concern you've got. But volunteering is one thing we always would love to have more of. With more than 3,000 volunteers, we're out there distributing a lot of food to folks, and that's the primary purpose for a lot of our volunteers. And of course, we have, in partnership with folks like Verily, been out there supporting free testing sites throughout San Jose. In fact, 2 sites are open 9 to 3, Monday through Friday, run by Verily at the County Fairgrounds and at Pal Stadium. That is free of charge. You do not need health insurance. Please just sign up. And the way you can sign up is, well, if you can go through our website, SiliconValleyStrong.org, that will get you eventually to the sign up. But I'm going to get that website actually for the Verily sites in just a moment. It just has escaped my memory at this moment. So I'll come right back to that. So obviously the pandemic has affected all of us in profound ways, but no more than obviously the families who have lost loved ones and many thousands who have lost their jobs. The jobs that are most severely impacted are really primarily in leisure, hospitality, and retail, where we know so many small businesses are struggling mightily, as well as hotels and our convention center and other industries related to that airport have had to, the airlines have had to furlough and lay off a lot of employees. So this gives you a sense of the drop in what we call GDP, that's economic output, that more or less mirrors much of the employment losses. And here, one estimate from Boston Consulting Group about the share of jobs that are at risk. And at risk means folks are either working fewer hours, they've taken pay cuts, or they've been laid off or furloughed. And it is about a third of the jobs in our county. So obviously devastating to many, many families, and we need to do more, both to get people back to work, and we'll continue to prod the county to articulate some clarity the thresholds that are needed to be able to get folks back to work and restart many sectors of our economy. At the same time, we do all we can to support vulnerable families. The budgetary impacts obviously are severe from COVID at the state level and here locally as well. A lot of increased expenses as we're doing things like purchasing PPE and distributing food and taking a lot of additional measures in public safety. We know that this is true for cities throughout the state. The most devastating impacts are in losses of revenue in various ways, hotel tax and sales tax most prominent among them. And while we would love to have federal funding to backfill those losses, the reality is that for the most part, restrictions around federal funding are going to constrain our ability to simply fill gaps in our budget. The dollars we're using are primarily dedicated to actually respond to the COVID crisis, that is paying for PP&E and food and supporting testing sites. The current guidelines and regulations from Treasury Department don't allow us simply to fill holes in our budget. I do want to come back to one very important point. If you would like to get tested, you can register at www.projectbaseline.com. So pardon me for jumping backward here. Again, www.projectbaseline.com/COVID-19. That'll get you to specific testing registration that you can do at 2 sites in San Jose. Again, free of charge. You don't need health insurance. Okay, so let's jump into the budget. Here's the overview of the budget. Many who are neighborhood leaders are familiar with this chart. This describes the 3 basic categories of budgetary expenditures: special funds, capital funds, and the general fund. I'll just describe as a general matter, most of the wrangling, I'd say 99% of the fights in any budgetary year are over the general fund. Those are the dollars that tend to fund many of the services that are most visible to many of our residents: police, fire, libraries, maintenance, parks, a whole host of functions. That is the $1.1 billion, and clearly the fund that will be most severely impacted as well through COVID. The other funds I'll describe briefly. First, you see the largest share of our budget, about $2 billion, goes to what we call special funds. And these are dollars that are restricted under the law, usually under state or federal law, to be used for the specific purpose for which the dollars were generated. For example, if you're at the airport and you're paying a passenger fee at the airport, or airlines are paying gate fees, or for example, if you're renting a car there, you also pay a fee at the car rental facility. All those dollars that are generated stay at the airport under FAA federal regs. They have to be used for airport purposes only, and they essentially run the airport for us. Similarly, the Water Pollution Control Plant is a special fund. San Jose Clean Energy, which procures energy for 99% of our residents and businesses, is also a special fund. So those are, for example, utility fees that are paid for the electric power, which can only be used, of course, for purchase of electric power and related services, not for paying for cops, for example. So those special funds are restricted, so we're not going to spend much time talking about those, but I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Capital funds are also restricted, but in a different way. Capital funds tend to be restricted for construction only, or for acquisition of land that's used for construction. So, for example, when a developer is paying a fee for affordable housing, as we require throughout the city in all of our housing developments, That fee is called an inclusionary housing fee. That is capital restricted, can only be used to buy land or to purchase or to build affordable housing on that land. That is capital restricted for that purpose. Similarly, we have developers might pay fees for things like parks and park construction. Also, capital restricted goes into our capital funds budget. So those are how the dollars are divided. And as a general matter, we're going to really turn your focus to that blue section of the pie chart, which is the general fund, which is the $1.1 billion. In all, this entire enterprise, this $4.1 billion enterprise, employs about 6,500 employees here at the City of San Jose. And while that might seem like a lot of employees, the reality is that's almost 1,000 fewer employees than we had 20 years ago. Let me repeat that. 20 years ago, we had about 7,400 employees in the city. And we were serving 200,000 fewer people 20 years ago than we are today. So the lesson from all that is very simple. We've got a lot of employees who are working very hard to do more with less. And that is the result of several recessions that we've had to deal with, certainly structural challenges we've had in our budget relating, for example, to retiree benefits and a whole host of issues relating to revenues that we've been grappling with. And over the last 5 or 6 years, we've grappled with those pretty well. We've been able to start to really rebuild services in a significant way. Obviously, the challenge ahead is much, much different. So here's how our general fund revenues come to us, the roughly $1.1 billion. The two largest sources of revenue, sales tax and property tax, you can see toward the bottom of that chart. And then the other fees and taxes I'm happy to answer questions about. But we're going to see very steep drops in our sales tax. We'll see steep drop in what we call the transit occupancy tax, which is a hotel tax. The property tax numbers will drop somewhat, but we're going to probably not see really significant drops of property tax for another 2 years. That tends to be a lagging indicator as Prop 8 petitions are filed with the assessor. So for the most part, we're going to have a multi-year budget deficit that will be very substantial that we'll have to grapple with over the next 2 to 3 years, regardless of how quickly this economy reopens. The estimated shortfall for our next fiscal year beginning July 1st is about $72 million. That's primarily driven by revenue drops. The estimate from Jim Shannon and his team is about 9% in cuts in revenue. And that's almost twice as much of a revenue drop as we saw in the Great Recession and about 3 times that we saw in the dot-com bust. So this is a very severe hit to our budget. The good news is that the shortfall is only $72 million. I've seen larger shortfalls back in the Great Recession, in part because we've really worked hard to build reserves. We've worked hard to create means of making our fiscal situation more resilient. We've gone to the voters and struck a deal with all the unions on pension reform, whole host of measures, as well as revenue increases that our voters have approved that are making us more resilient. But nonetheless, this is a hard hit. And so we're going to talk about that in the next few minutes. Here are the proposed reductions in some key revenues. As you can see, sales tax, a drop of $47 million, business tax is $7 million. It gives you a picture of why we're going to have a $72 million deficit, net revenue loss of nearly $79 million. So our strategies for resolving this, and I should really explain, that's not just the $72 million deficit next year that we have to solve for. This pandemic actually created a deficit in the current year where we thought we were running a surplus, but obviously the bottom fell out. And Jim Shannon and company got to work very quickly about a month and a half ago and figured out we got a $45 million deficit in this current year, even before we get to July 1st. So that's when we enacted right away hiring freezes, and we made a lot of our vacancies go away, vacant positions. And we suspended a lot of non-essential spending. We're using some savings to backfill. And we solved that $45 million deficit 2 weeks ago with the council vote. So we've now put that deficit behind us. So that's a share of a roughly $120 million hole. Now we've got the $72 million hole to solve for July 1st. And we're going to use a lot of the basic budgeting principles we have, really focused on ensuring that we use as much as possible ongoing solutions for this ongoing deficit. One-time dollars are not going to solve the problem, certainly not by themselves. So because we know this is coming at us pretty fast, we still will need to use some one-time dollars. We're blessed to have a great team in the financing department who is going to manage to find more than $25 million through refunding and refinancing of City Hall debt at lower interest rates. We are utilizing some of the reserves that we have been saving up over the last several years. We've been very diligent about building reserves during the good years, so we would be ready for the next recession. So yes, we'll be using some of those reserves, but those are only one-time solutions, and we know those dollars go away and we still have to solve for future years. And so we have to actually make the harder decisions, which is how we're going to find ongoing savings and revenue increases. We have worked very hard with the city team, many department heads, and really throughout the entire city organization. Thousands of our city employees have participated in budget meetings with our city manager to talk about where we can cut with the minimal amount of pain to our residents and to our workforce. So there are several reductions we'll talk about in service levels. We've been very creative, and this is Nancy Klein, Office of Economic Development team, and in coming up with a revenue capture agreement with eBay that will enable us to generate about $20 million more in revenue that will soften the blow for us. And then, of course, we're looking for ways always to pay down debt. And from my own March budget message, I directed to pay down of several outstanding debts with some one-time money we had that will reduce the ongoing financing costs for us in the years ahead. And then we're going to engage in some pre-funding of retirement obligations that will also save some money. So as a result, we will have some ongoing reductions in service, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. Here's a picture of what we see just this year and the year starting July 1st, a total shortfall of a little more than 120 million, I believe my math is correct. We've solved that 45 million already. Now we're on to the 72 million. I would not be surprised if in the weeks ahead, this number actually gets even deeper as we learn more about what's going on in the economy. Obviously, there's a lot shifting underneath us right now, particularly as we think about things like sales tax. This was a forecast from way back in February before COVID was really prominent in our minds. And there we really calculated, Jim Shannon's team looked at what a recession would look like if it struck in the following year. The bad news is we've got a recession much sooner and it's a lot steeper. But the good news is we were planning for what might happen with a recession. That's why we were setting aside reserves and doing what we could to tighten the belt. So now the belt tightening is simply going to have to be more severe. And here's what we're talking about. About 100, a little more than 100 positions throughout various departments and about $21 million in general fund budget reductions. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. For example, our community service officer program, these are folks who really help our police department in providing a lot of services and functions that are not hazardous in the sense that they don't involve them carrying a badge and a gun and arresting bad guys. For the most part, they're taking reports, they're doing investigation, they're handling a lot of non-emergency police services, and doing an awful lot of really important work for our department. We were going to hire to fill 10 vacant CSO positions. That's not going to happen because of these budget cuts. We're also not going to be able to rebuild the department at the pace that we have been over the last several years because we're going to eliminate this sworn hire ahead program that helps the department be able to hire in anticipation of retirement. So what that means is as folks retire, we are going to have some drop in police staffing, and we're going to do everything we can as soon as our budgetary situation allows to get us to be able to restore those positions. In our Parks and Recs department, there are a lot of cuts in areas where we believe that because of the nature of the pandemic, we'd probably have to cut these programs anyway, regardless of our budgetary situation. Swim programs, for example, are not allowed under the county order. The family camp is not an activity that the county order currently would allow. A lot of the placemaking activations involve a lot of public congregation the county would not allow anyway. So obviously eliminating these enables us to save some dollars so that we can hang on to services that are critical. Another painful area of cuts in the libraries, the proposal is for a reduction of 4 hours in our services a week. And so I know Jill Bourne and her team are looking for ways to soften that blow, and we'll be having a lot of discussion, I suspect, about that issue in particular with the rest of the council in the weeks ahead as we decide whether or not we can reduce that reduction and mitigate that reduction in some way. All right, there are some other areas where we've had one-time funded programs for downtown foot police patrol, for example, and we're reducing some of the neighborhood grants for Beautify SJ. Again, painful reductions, but this is the nature of a budget deficit. But there are a lot of areas where we're going to maintain our focus and really keep our commitment to voters. I want to talk about a couple real quickly. One is a measure just passed a few weeks ago, Measure E, passed in March. That was a transfer tax measure. It would fund affordable housing and also services for homelessness to try to get more of our homeless neighbors off the street. The good news is it did pass, and we're going to ensure that every dollar stays in that affordable housing fund as we committed to voters. Similarly, with Measure T, that was a measure we passed to pay for a lot of infrastructure for public safety, for example, to build fire stations. We've got Station 37 is under construction now, and Station 8 will be soon under construction, we hope. Also, it's being used for road repair and replacement. So we are paving more miles of roads last year we did than any year in the prior quarter century, and we're going to keep that pace up of repaving roads because of Measure T and also VTA Measure B. That funding will stay in place, and we're going to focus on ensuring that we get our roads back up to a state of good repair. Then there are some other programs that I launched as a mayor in the last few years, really focusing on a lot of the challenges we've got in our valley around equity. SJ Learns is after-school learning program for children in our poorest neighborhoods, ensuring they have good educational access after school. San Jose Works, providing jobs, summer jobs for many of our teens. Obviously, that will depend a lot on county decisions about reopening the economy, but we're going to continue that program. And then SJ Bridge, which provides transitional jobs for many of our homeless individuals who are working their way out of homelessness. They're cleaning up our roadways, and we know there's a big problem with trash in our city, and we believe that they are part of the solution, and we're grateful that they are willing to be part of the solution. Okay, so we're going to keep trying to find ways to find opportunity in this crisis, this pandemic. We think that perhaps with the help of some federal dollars and with emergency orders in place, there are ways that we can do more than we could before. For example, in closing the digital divide, I think on Tuesday you're going to hear the council consider a proposal of mine and of our team that is headed up by Jill Bourne and in partnership with Marianne Dewan and others to see if we can expand a free Wi-Fi program that we had already launched with Eastside Union High School District over at James Lick, or 6,000 families that are now part of that, that all are in the surrounding neighborhoods around James Lick, that they now have free Wi-Fi for their students who are in those families, as well as obviously for adults and anyone else who can benefit from connectivity. We know there's a severe divide in this city as there is in other cities, and so we're now under construction building out a similar Wi-Fi network around Overfeld High School and surrounding neighborhoods. We'll next move on to Yerba Buena, and then subsequent to that, Independence High and Oak Grove. So more to come, and we're also doing more to try to get more devices into the hands of children who are relegated to distance learning as a result of the shutdown in the schools. We are going to do more on that in the weeks ahead, and I think you should definitely stay engaged if you're interested in that issue, because there'll be a lot moving. We're trying to accelerate our efforts to house the homeless. I think many know that we've been renting motel rooms and so forth to move homeless individuals in. We're also trying to create more permanent solutions, building more than 300 units of prefab modular housing in 3 separate locations. We're able to move much more quickly, more nimbly now because of emergency orders that were required to get a lot of that housing in place anyway for people who are COVID positive. to help isolate, and then that housing can serve as permanent housing for our homeless as well. One site's under construction right now. We'll be able to build it out in about 4 weeks. That's typically a project that would take maybe 4 years to build out under normal circumstances. So again, using this crisis in a way that helps us address our multiple crises in this city is very important. And then obviously seeing how we can create more outdoor dining and outdoor commerce opportunities for our businesses through San Jose Al Fresco. That's another important opportunity for us, using public spaces, our sidewalks, our paseos, our plazas, parking spaces for outdoor commerce. We think there are elements of that may well become permanent in our city. I think that could be beneficial for the businesses and for many residents who enjoy, obviously, the outdoor life of our city. So the June message is coming in a few weeks. I'll be announcing that on June 8th, and then we'll consider that for the whole council on June 16th. There may well need to be additional budget reductions. We're going to learn more in the coming weeks, and even after we approve this budget in June, we may need to come back in the fall. If what we learn is that, in fact, the economy is not reopening at a pace we'd all prefer, then we are going to have to face additional cuts. And those are even more challenging reductions, and we'll be hearing more about that in September. So we have more budget meetings ahead, as I mentioned. But most importantly, I'd love to hear your comments and your questions. And so we're going to stop the sharing here. There we go. Thank you, Henry. And we'll go right to you. If you could raise your virtual hands as you have questions or comments or input of any kind, you can raise your hand by going to the participant bar on the right, and on the bottom there should be a button that indicates that you can raise your hand. Please push that, and I'll see the blue hand raised, and I'd be happy to call on you. Mary Lou, welcome. If you could please unmute yourself. Welcome, Mary Lou. Everyone has 2 minutes.
Good morning, Sam.
Welcome, Mary Lou.
My question is, I'm a bicyclist, and I use my bicycle as a form of transportation. I do not own a car. And I, for years, have been frustrated by the lack of street cleaning, especially along Monterey Highway, which is a thoroughfare that I often take. But I'm not speaking just for me and Monterey Highway. I'm speaking for all people that use the bike lane. Are the streets going to be cleaned any less well? And they're not even cleaned very well as it is, but is it going to deteriorate from this point going forward?
Yeah, I share your frustration. The street cleaning is part of a contract we have with our garbage haulers. So my understanding is there will not be any impacts on street cleaning specifically. Jim, did you want to weigh in on that?
You're right, Mayor. There's nothing in the budget there that would change that street sweeping.
And let me just say, as a fellow cyclist, I agree wholeheartedly. Monterey is never very well swept, and there's a lot of glass and rocks out there. We know that's a danger issue. So let me also take that back. Henry's kind enough to be here, so he'll be taking a couple notes, and we'll follow up with the haulers and with our environmental services team to make sure some of those pain points are better dealt with. So thank you for the question. Next up is Rosalinda Aguilar. Welcome, Rosalinda. Rosalinda, could you unmute yourself? There should be a button there at the bottom. Rosalinda, we're not able to hear you right now. So if you are able to unmute yourself, I believe the button should be on the bottom left of your screen. If you're on Zoom now, and you'll see a mute indicator, and you'll want to turn that off. There you go.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. I'm just wondering if street calming tools will be protected under Measure T. As a leader of the Guadalupe, Washington Neighborhood Association, last year or the last couple of years, we've started to make requests prior to your budget review. And some of our requests were approved and some were pending further studies. I'm just wondering where things like that fall within this new budget crisis that we're experiencing.
Yeah, great question, Rosalinda. So let me describe what we know of as of this budget today. Obviously, things could change if it gets worse, and I'll ask Jim to fill in details. But we started a program for sort of a rapid response to street calming challenges, where we're just using paint without any physical barriers. And we think that there are a lot of improvements we can make, for example, for traffic calming, narrowing lanes, and different modifications that can expand access for bikes and peds and so forth. And that team is going to continue to be funded under this budget. So that's some of the simpler, lower hanging fruit that doesn't require a lot of physical construction. The physical, some of the traffic calming projects that are certainly anything that's underway will continue to get built. So we're not going to defund something that is already under construction. I know there is some of the one-time money is being reduced for individual neighborhood traffic calming projects. And Jim, do you have any specifics on that?
Mayor, I know that most of the. I'm going to scroll down here as I kind of answer here. I know most of the funding that's available for the traffic calming and the safety improvements and the Vision Zero projects that you're talking about are in the traffic capital program, which we have a whole nother book that really talks about the different funding sources that are related to the capital improvement program. Those are primarily driven by grants and by some of the taxes that are levied on private development construction. So some of those are doing fine. Some of those are doing a little bit poor because of the economic climate that we're going to be in. Still a pretty significant amount, though. I think we have $7 million over 2 years for the Vision Zero program. And I think broadly over 5 years, we've got $7.4 million for various traffic calming projects. I'm going to try to scroll down here in a little bit to see what the neighborhood. We have a specific allocation for neighborhood traffic calming projects. And I'm just trying to see what that one is here, which I think is, let me find that number and I'll get back to you over the next couple of.
Okay, no, questions. That's fine. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, and just also to clarify, you described, Linda, you mentioned Measure T. Measure T spending will not be affected by this downturn. That is a bond measure, and so we will be spending as we would otherwise with Measure T, but most of those dollars are really for basic road maintenance and not as much for traffic calming. Jim accurately described what was going on with our capital budget. It's primarily grants and some construction taxes and so forth. I know there was some general fund source for some of the traffic calming projects that will be reduced in this coming year that were allocated based on need, simply because we don't have enough general fund money to get there. So the short answer is there will be a bit less, and we're hoping it won't be a lot less. All depends on what happens with some of those tax revenue indicators. Okay, Hillary Thorson, welcome. Hi, Hillary.
Can you hear me?
I can, thanks.
Great. So I wanted to say thank you to all the city workers who are keeping things going while dealing with the pandemic in their personal lives. I'm a library and early education commissioner, and I would like to request that the city, at the very least, maintain the library budget. Library is an integral part of the community, and the services are essential at the time of this crisis. The library has met the challenge by providing face masks and face shields for healthcare workers, masks for the homeless and elderly, issuing thousands of library cards, e-library cards, answering 2,000 chat questions, lending close to 150,000 ebooks, and running virtual programs, including the Spring Into Reading program and the upcoming Summer Learns program. And it will be even more essential during the recovery. The current fine-free program for juvenile materials has allowed for unprecedented partnerships with school districts to provide students with library cards. And this has been really helpful during this time of sheltering in place for keeping students connected with educational resources. Parents, including myself, educators, and childcare workers are all relying on the library for distance learning tools, resources, and virtual programming. And with huge unemployment numbers as a result of the pandemic, the library's resources like SJPL Works will be essential for helping people re-enter the workforce and acquire new skills while they aren't working. So reducing hours would be especially detrimental, especially when libraries reopen the physical spaces and will need to have social distancing measures in place, so may not be able to serve as many people at one time. And public libraries support the most vulnerable, and we need to make sure that the library services continue to be funded so that they can provide services to all of San Jose residents during their greatest time of need.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all those points and all well put. I know we have 5 members of our community who are calling in by phone, and I want to remind them that if you'd like to speak, to raise your hand, just push *9. Again, *9, and that'll get you in the queue, so then I can call on you. You're free certainly to listen if you like, but if you like to ask a question, push *9 if you're calling in. And then obviously if you're here on Zoom, on computer, just raise your hand in the bottom right bar. Nicole Draus. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for hosting this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, excuse me. So I have 3 things. First is an acknowledgement. Second is a question about the expansion of our development plans, long-term strategic plans. And the third is a question or request about funding the Neighborhoods Commission. So first off, I want to acknowledge the city workers. Those who I know personally are heroes. I mean, they have their own families, they have their own questions, concerns, and they've been working 12, 14, 18-hour days in some cases. And I've just been really in awe of that contribution. Also, as we head into this, this is bad, but it could be so much worse. And I have a lot of confidence in the combined hundreds or thousands of years of experience that we've accrued through our retention of great city employees and a quality commission, a quality council, and quality mayor team. So that gives me confidence as we go in. My question is, 1, where do you rate on a scale of 1 to 10 the strength of our continued strategic plans to bring in Google, to build out with our development partners? There are dozens of development partners. Those are our strategic future. And while it's bad, it could be worse. It will be really bad if the bottom falls out of those partnerships, and we'll really be left with no economic base. So that's one question. And then the second is, the heart of our city is our neighborhoods. And I know that every city council member cherishes their relationships with their neighbors. We have a neighborhoods commission. That group is really ready, eager, champing at the bit to make an even bigger difference. And we feel like, as unfortunate as this is, that there's even greater role to play in a group like the Neighborhoods Commission, especially as led by the wonderful Olympia Williams and our chair, Jim Carter. So that might be a mouthful. Maybe I've run out of time, but if you could particularly address that question about development, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, and Nicole, specifically the question about Neighborhoods Commission, could you just reframe that really quickly for me so I understand?
Fund it, love it,
okay,
support it. I mean,
got it.
Recognize. I mean, I know every city council member recognizes it one way or another.
Yeah,
but it's a group that we're not going to have the money, but we do have boots on the ground, and those boots really do really want to be expanding leadership in the community in all flavors. And we've been doing it. I mean, I know you've been seeing particular individuals, but there's a body of leadership that can be called upon here and can be led well by the Parks and Rec. I know we'll have cuts there, but I feel like those cuts actually call for more participation and support from the Neighborhoods Commission.
Right. Thank you. And Nicole, thank you first for your service on the commission. Thank you to you and to Hillary for recognizing the incredibly hardworking group we've got of city employees who have, as you put it very well, been just committing unbelievable amounts of time and compromising their own safety in various ways just by virtue of the nature of this pandemic to be out there on the front line. and working many, many hours to support the community. So thank you for recognizing that. First, on the Neighborhoods Commission, I don't think you're going to see any reduction in support for that very important and vital function of engagement with our community and community leaders. And I appreciate and value the input they provide. And hopefully you recognize in the last few years, we have instituted specific procedures to make sure that every city staff report is incorporating Neighborhoods Commission input where you guys have weighed in. So we have really clear communication. On the economic base, I know that was the larger question. First, I would rate very highly the team that we have here at the city to continue to drive those projects to success to the extent that the circumstances allow us to. And by that, I mean, we've got a very sophisticated team led by Kim Walesh and Nancy Klein, and then on my team, Kelly Klein. These are women who have a lot of experience at this city. Kelly also was the head of economic development at Cupertino when the Apple campus was built, and she was head of economic development in Fremont when they were building out the Tesla campus. So these are folks who understand what they're doing. The challenge, of course, as we know, is that it's really not up to us. That there is a much larger set of forces out there in the economy, and they're much more powerful than City Hall, and they're called supply and demand. And the good news is all indications are from Google that they continue to be committed to moving forward. Certainly the pace at which they move forward will be affected by this pandemic. They've already indicated they can't really make the deadline to get a set of plans approved by the council and onto the state by the end of this year. And so we're looking for extensions, which is fine. We understand it. The reality is everybody is shifting their attention to deal with what is urgent, and everyone's trying to keep the wheels on. So we understand that, and we're going to do everything we can possibly support that and to continue to ensure that gets built out. But the good news is they're still interested. It's going to depend less on us and more on them. And the reality is that it's their money that they're going to invest, and that's true for every private sector entity. And I think this is often overlooked sometimes in the public debate and discussion. We just assume that these companies are obligated to come here to San Jose, and I can assure you, when I have conversations with mayors around the country, they are not obligated to come here, because those are mayors who would be desperate to see the kind of investment we get routinely here in San Jose, and they don't get it. And so we know it can go as quickly as it comes, and so that's why we're going to continue to hustle to get ready to ensure it's there. I should also mention J. Paul has a major investment pending here in the city of San Jose, 5 million square feet in our downtown core, that will also be critical to bring in jobs and, yes, revenue that will be critical for sustaining basic city services, everything from our after-school programs and libraries to police. We need that revenue to rebuild. So we want to continue to support those efforts. We know in other cases, though, Boston Properties, for example, put a hold on their project, about 1 million square feet in the West Diridon area. And again, for totally understandable reasons. The capital markets have frozen, and a lot of these developers are saying, well, maybe the tenant we thought we had isn't going to be there because they're not looking to expand anymore. And maybe a lot of those folks are actually looking to lay off. So this is the nature of market cycles. It just so happens this is going to be a very sharp cycle that we're going to have to grapple with. And we hope it will be one that will not be lengthy in duration. So we're going to do everything we can just to be ready to support whatever private sector entity wants to invest in our city. But ultimately, we do have to remember it's up to them and it's their money. So we're just going to have to do our best. Thank you for the question, though. I have either Pat Amira or Mary Amira, both of whom I know well. Welcome. Is that Mary?
I'm afraid it's Patrick.
Oh, Patrick, how are you, sir?
Sam, it's good seeing you. I appreciate what you're doing here this morning with the budget stuff. I had a question about your aspect of the homeless, and I know you're in and you mentioned a temporary housing kind of situation that's, I think, already been started.
Yeah.
My memory is that there's 40 units or 60 units that are going into that. Is there a plan for really addressing the large number of homeless that are on our streets today, the 6,000 roughly that are in the city, the 10,000 roughly in the county,
Yeah.
that is worked into this budget or is planned for the next budget years?
Patrick, thank you for the question. Thank you for all of your work on this really important issue. I think this is how we met probably
Yes.
20 years ago, back when you were on the board of organization called Emergency Housing Consortium. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know you've been a good supporter of the homeless issue and trying to resolve it. And I know it's not one that's going to go away, irrespective of whether we have a COVID-19 thing hanging over our head or not.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. Let me describe what we're doing in the short term and then a little bit in the long term. As you know, the solution to homelessness is housing. And so we got to get housing built quickly and make it more accessible for folks. In the short run, we were looking at a couple of transitional housing projects that we can really leverage to help those individuals who might be able to pay for rent because they have a Section 8 voucher, or maybe they're a veteran with a VASH voucher. There's no apartments out there that are open. And often it takes typically 60 and 90 days for them to even get into an apartment. So we create transitional housing to help have a place for them to land and get back on their feet while they're looking to get that open apartment. And so we finished one of those tiny home projects about a dozen blocks from my house, east of 101 near Mayberry. And then a second one's under construction now at 280 and 101 in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So the good news about those is the first one's up and running. It's been very successful already. We've had more than a dozen people have transitioned out of that into permanent housing already. And we expect many, many more. That's going to really cycle people through a few months at a time. So although it's only 40 units, we expect it'll serve a couple hundred a year potentially. And then separate from that, we've got these prefab modular dorms that are under construction. The first of 3 sites under construction now. The other 2 have just been, the bids have just come in. And we're building 80 units on one site in South San Jose. And then we'll build a second site, about 120 units, and then a third, a little more than 100. That will be for, the third one will be for families. And, you know, the great lesson we're learning out of that is when the governor waived CEQA and we're able to get through some of the red tape, we can move pretty darn fast. And really thanks to the leadership of Jim Ortfall, who's been spearheading this thing. As I mentioned, these 80 units will get built in 4 weeks that we ordinarily would take 4 years to build. And we're going to do it at about somewhere around $60,000 to $70,000 per unit, which is, for those of you in the construction industry know, that's about 1/10 of what it costs to build an apartment right now in a typical apartment building if we were to build in conventional ways. And so we're using city land, obviously, that's free. It's not always going to be the case when we're building on other people's land. And we're using prefab modular housing construction. And obviously, it's not the solution forever. It's just going to be primarily transitional housing, but it is a critical solution. And so I think what we are learning through this process is ways to move faster, more nimbly, and more cost effectively to tackle this enormous crisis. Now, I just described for you what a total of about 380 units. And as you described, we've got a problem with 6,000 human beings. Obviously, there's a real mismatch in those numbers. So we've got to do much more. But I think in the longer term, one thing we have discovered, at least in the better times that we were having a few months ago, is we were having considerable success when we started to recognize that we needed to use more cost-effective ways of keeping families housed before they became homeless. And I know someone you know well, Jen Loving, really spearheaded this effort of her Destination Home to try to see how we could put small, modest amounts of money in the hands of families right as they were about to get their notice of eviction. And with about $4,400 on average for each family, we're able a year later to keep 95% of those families housed. And that is an extraordinary cost savings to the taxpayer, and most importantly, an enormous amount of saved human misery, because those are families that will be pushed out in the street. So we think that's a formula that's going to be very successful that we really want to drive in the future, particularly once we get the wheels back on in this economy, which is not simply investing in the housing, but much more cost effectively investing in keeping people housed when they've just lost their job or they maybe have had a health setback and there's been a loss of income in some way. If we can provide that bridge, then we've got a much cheaper solution that's obviously going to do far more for people. So that's the longer term strategy in combination with everything we're trying to do around construction housing. Obviously, the help we're getting from the county in passing Measure B a couple years ago, and now more recently at the city with the passage of our own Measure E, will provide some more dollars to do both of those things, both build the housing and hopefully keep more people housed who are on the edge. More to come on that front. Thanks, Patrick, and please give my best as well. Robin Romer, welcome, sir. Hi, Robin.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
I can, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Liccardo. And first off, I wanted to thank both you and staff for continuing to strengthen Vision Zero with this budget as much as you can, obviously, under circumstances, and making it safer for people to walk and bike has become so much more important even now than before. And the second thing I wanted to thank you for, and this might be a bit nerdy, but for budgeting an update to the overall North San Jose transportation policy. It's been a tricky situation up here, and I really hope that this update will finally allow us to unlock some of the growth potential in the area. Now, as a parent at Orchard Elementary in North San Jose, I have to bring up the shortcut extension.
Of course.
In the capital budget. And as you know, it's a $50 million city-led project that will add about 14,000 cars a day to a residential street next to an elementary school. As I understand, staff proposes right now to increase funding for shortcut by about $50,000. And then my understanding is further that as the project moves along into right-of-way acquisition and construction, the city will have to cough up another about $5 million as a local match to Measure B funding. Now my question would be, as a shortcut moves forward, and I believe the project and the EIR will go to council for final approval this June, so in a few weeks, how much does the budgetary situation and the budgetary impact of this factor into your decision-making on which capital projects to pursue and which not?
Because those are capital dollars, and this is something, as you know, has been in the works for a couple of decades. The dollars were already allocated as I understood it. And Jim may want to correct me if I'm wrong about that. And so I don't expect they'll be affected by this. Now, obviously, we still need VTA approval for the Measure B dollars, and then we're going to need ultimately probably some state and regional funding to complete the project. And all of those things undoubtedly may be affected by this economy. And so I know, Robin, you've been a very faithful opponent of this project, and I would say very articulate one and very well-informed opponent of this project. And so I appreciate the fact that you have taken great pains to make sure the community is well-informed about the risks here. I would venture to guess that if you're looking to derail this project, it's probably going to happen more likely because of the regional dollar component, which is much larger. I would also say, as we're looking at this North San Jose analysis, I am more than willing to keep an open mind about whether or not what we learn changes our perspective about the necessity of this project. I've always been led to believe, based on analysis that's been done for more than 2 decades, that this was a project that was critically important for circulation in that North San Jose area. I know this has been controversial for many parents who are concerned. This, as you know, was planned well before that school was built. And so I'm always open to new information. And obviously, if we learn more through this additional analysis, I will certainly be open to a pivot if that's ultimately what the data compels us to do. I'm going to make also certain that if this thing gets built, it is built with safety absolutely paramount in the design to ensure the safety of those children at the school. But thank you for raising the issue, Robin. I suspect we're going to have some more conversation in the weeks ahead. Amity Bateman, welcome, Amity.
Hello, Mayor. Thank you so much for having this time. I really appreciate you sharing this with the community. And I also appreciate the creative ways you guys are looking at possible opportunities in the crisis to, fast track housing and some other areas. I am a member of Surge at Sacred Heart, and as has come up in some of the other callers' concerns, some of the areas that you guys have outlined for budget reductions have the potential to have an unequal impact on vulnerable populations. So people of color, undocumented neighbors of ours. Last year, I know the city identified equity as a priority for the budget, but those were different times. And so I'm hoping you can share how the city is ensuring that vulnerable people are protected and that equity remains a priority while you are making these hard budget decisions.
Yeah, thank you, Amity. So we are retaining a focus on equity, and in fact, staff has released an equity analysis of the proposed reductions. Obviously, in the good times, it's an equity analysis of how we're going to spend money. Those are better conversations to have. In this case, it's about how we're going to best protect those who are most vulnerable against the brunt of the cuts. That being said, let me be painfully honest here, which is the most vulnerable communities in our city are the ones who depend the most on city services. And I know that too well. My experience back in my days as a criminal prosecutor, and the extent to which in struggling neighborhoods, residents critically need police response and emergency medical response if they don't have health insurance, and the host of ways in which city services are absolutely essential. And so anytime we are cutting any city service, it is virtually assured that vulnerable communities will feel it worse by virtue of the fact that they're already vulnerable and they already depend on city service more than others. And, for example, this summer, we're cutting our aquatics program across the city. Now, we're doing that primarily because of the public health mandate that tells us we can't have outdoor swimming, at least not now. But we know how that's going to cut. We know, even though we're doing it throughout the city, it's kids in low-income families who are not going to have access to pools, wealthier kids or kids maybe in families where they're able to afford being able to have a membership at a club, or even better if they've got a pool in the neighborhood or in their yard. I mean, that's obviously a very obvious disparate impact. So I want to say we're going to continue to do this analysis, and we're going to be very transparent about equity impacts of what decisions we're making. But I don't want to mislead in saying that we're going to be able to do this in ways that ensures that vulnerable communities are not going to be impacted adversely. Because we know in any budget reduction, it's always those who depend the most on government service that are affected the worst and most painfully. And so we simply have to have our eyes very wide open about how we can protect them best we possibly can. And I think everyone at the city is committed to doing that. And I think we've seen that really in the city workforce over the last several weeks. You look at 160 employees now that are entirely dedicated to distributing 2.5 million meals a week. They were never doing that before, and they're doing it now because we know that's where the need is. All the work that Jill and her team are doing around digital inclusion, although that is work we were doing before, but now we're accelerating it. Obviously, the focus is on children and low-income families, the work we're doing around homelessness. So all this is with a primary focus on protecting those who are most vulnerable. But as you know, there are just no assurances about the fact the impacts are not going to be felt. We know they will be. So thank you for the question, and we can look forward to continuing this conversation about equity, about race, and about the disparate needs in our community. And we're going to have to just continue to learn and do better. Jim Larkin, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. My concern is also with the homeless issues. And I know I was involved with my neighbor association with the opening of the Renaissance House on Center Road.
Yeah.
And in doing that, it came to me that it takes a long time to get a homeless person into one of those facilities. And now I'm concerned that in my neighborhood, I've got I want to say a cluster of homeless people that are blocking the sidewalks. They're out there all day long. They're not practicing the social distancing. They're not wearing masks. They're just involving themselves where the community can't go in that neighborhood. And I just can't get anybody out there to address that issue and to get them to just follow the rules. What do we do in this case where they're just not following the rules?
And you're talking about an encampment out there near Renaissance House?
Yeah, there's it's a long lone bluff by the Burger King there. I've been to the city council, and I've been contacting our council member a number of times, but
yeah.
It's just a growing problem, and it's not in a place that the homeless people go to unless they're called to. And of course, now with the COVID-19 issue, we're just not addressing homeless issues.
Yeah. Appreciate your frustration. I know you're not alone on this. So let me explain. Under, I believe, both the direction, I'm not sure if it's explicit direction or simply recommendation that came from the state and county. We have stopped doing encampment sweeps. We've done that because we are being told, and the best information is that doing encampment sweeps increases the likelihood of mixing of individuals in ways that will spread COVID. And so we know that's a real pain point for residents where those encampments are particularly in troubling locations. And I fully appreciate your frustration. Let me talk to our team about what exactly is going on at that encampment over by the Burger King. I assume you mean your center. I also share your frustration about the rate at which we are getting people housed in the projects that were getting built. I know we've got several other developments that are under construction now, in addition to the ones I mentioned earlier. We hope that the first community housing project over in North San Pedro will be open soon. We just opened one on 2nd and North 2nd and St. James, I should say. So there are other projects like that. And I am learning that getting individuals through the county process, and there's a very sophisticated rubric they use for identifying who is needy and who is most vulnerable and who gets to go to which project, that there's way too much lag time. And I've expressed my frustration. I know many of my colleagues have as well, that we're not moving people more quickly into those developments when they're getting built. So I know our city staff is working with county staff, hopefully to expedite that process at the county. But it's fundamentally one that's not entirely within our control. So I'll continue to express the views that you've shared, which is it's taken too long to get people in those projects. And let me check in with our homelessness response team to determine if there are particular concerns with regard to safety around that encampment and whether or not we can at least get in there and pull some folks out and get them into motels and to other locations, if nothing else, to reduce the density of the population there. We are in a variety of encampments throughout the city, providing washing stations and sanitizer and other kinds of showers and so forth, portable showers, so that folks can keep themselves safe. But we know that's by no means capturing everybody who's out there on the street. And so we're just going to have to keep working hard at it. But I'll follow up on this, Jim. Thank you for raising the concern, and my apologies for the frustration. Again, I want to emphasize to our call-in listeners, if you're on the phone and you're not on computer, please dial *9, again, *9 or *9, whatever you call that thing on your phone. And that will get you in the queue to ask a question. But you're certainly free to listen without asking questions. But if you want to make a comment or ask a question, that's the key, *9. And we have just a couple folks left, I think. So we'll wrap this up shortly. But if you want to raise a question, make a comment, please raise your hand. That is the blue hand that appears on the participant screen. I think you can do that on the bottom right of your screen. And then we'll wrap things up Tina Morrill. Hello, Tina. Tina, I'm not hearing from you right now. Is it possible you're muted on your end? I know I heard from you a few days ago, so I assume that it's not a software issue. Tina, still not able to hear you, so you may want to try messing around with that mute button or something else. Okay, we're going to come back to you, Tina, because it appears right now we're not able to hear you. So if you want to try messing with it a little bit, we'll come right back to you. We'll first go to Lisa. Lisa, welcome, and thank you for everything that you are doing with Tyco.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and City staff for your leadership during these difficult times and for this forum to question and comment. My name is Lisa Uemura. I'm Executive Director for San Jose Tyco. And based on the budget information shared publicly, it looks like the Office of Cultural Affairs grants will be decreasing around 60% since the hotel tax is so significantly reduced in the coming fiscal year. For many of the arts in this area, OCA grants are a significant portion of annual income. And with so many in need in these difficult times, I urge you to make the arts an and not an or. As you know, the arts in San Jose consists of many smaller, medium-sized organizations like my own San Jose Tyco. Our arts ecosystem serves many communities of color that are in many ways the most vulnerable. Arts will be integral to the recovery of public life as we move out of this pandemic, this most urgent pandemic stage, and start to explore the loosening of the shelter-in-place directives. As you explore both pragmatic and creative solutions to the shortfall, art should be a part of your problem-solving arsenal since our work impacts so many other businesses. My own org, with a meager $800,000 annual operating budget, reaches an annual audience space of 70,000. In turn, our activities help to pump 1.8 million into the local economy. We are placemakers, employers, we are nonprofits and small businesses. Our audience members and program participants are tourists, restaurant patrons, and consumers. As you look and find new income sources to bolster city revenue, consider creating alternative means to supporting the arts beyond current year projected hotel tax. Thank you again for this time to comment, and thank you for all that you are doing to help our city.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks for your leadership with San Jose Tyco. It's certainly a pride of our community. Lisa, you're right that there's devastating cuts in cultural arts grants, but I don't believe it's 60%. I think it's less. Let me just check in with Jim. Jim, when we last looked at this, I think the reduction was roughly 6.3 million to 3.6 million. Was that right? In the TOT grant to arts and cultural organizations?
Mayor, that is correct. So when you look at, so we have those allocations are based on a formula in the city's muni code. And so when you look at the allocation compared to the TOT revenue from last year to the new TOT estimated for this current year, it's that difference of about $2.7 million.
Okay.
From 6.3 to 3.7.
Okay, so it's somewhere around 40 and change percent. Very steep reduction. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. And it looks a little bit bigger when you're looking at some of the budget documents. It looks like a bigger drop than what I just said, because when you see what the current year's funding is, or the 1920 funding is, it has some carryover funds from the previous years that get lumped together there. So it looks a little bit like a steeper drop than it is, though still pretty significant.
Yeah, it certainly is. So just so everyone's aware, how we have funded for decades our grants to arts and cultural organizations. We have different categories of grants, 3 different categories, one for festivals, one for ongoing. What it has always come out of hotel tax revenue. And obviously that is a very volatile source of revenue, because we know hotels come and go with the economy. And it just so happens with this particular pandemic, it's extremely volatile because this is probably the worst hit industry, that in airlines, I think, on the planet. And so obviously the cuts are even worse. It may be the case that as a council, we need to reconsider whether it's really TOT that is the basis for arts grants going forward, given the volatility of the revenue source. And that's certainly a question I'm quite willing to consider. That's not going to suddenly get a lot more money to the arts, but hopefully provide a little more stability to those grant programs. But again, something I am willing to consider, Lisa, and appreciate that many of those organizations are obviously employing a lot of people and importantly, adding much to the character of our community. So thank you for raising the issue. And I suspect we're going to have more conversation about this probably in the weeks ahead. There was a person who was calling in who has a phone number ending in 1205, who has your hand raised. Welcome.
Hi, Sam. It's Tina Morrill.
Oh, hi,
I'm calling in by phone. I'm at work. So anyway,
yeah.
First I want to say thank you guys, you and the council very much for all the work that you're doing. I know these are really trying times. I'd like to get your general thoughts about the planned airport expansion, given the potential reduction in travel, understanding that you and the council are having to take a long view of this planned expansion. I assume it's extremely expensive.
Yeah, great question, Tina. I know, obviously, since you live over there, not far from the airport, I know that's of intense concern to an awful lot of residents. As you know, airline industry's been devastated. Passenger counts are probably down close to 90%. We know it's going to be a long road to get passenger counts up to where they were just a few months ago. And I saw one estimate of something on the order of 4 to 5 years. And obviously, it's not until it gets somewhere near that number that I think anyone's going to be terribly focused on expansion at that airport. So I can tell you, as of 2 days ago, when we were looking at this in our public meetings, the expansion was not part of the 5-year capital budget for the airport. That doesn't mean it couldn't go back in if circumstances change dramatically, but it's not currently planned in the near term, that is in the next, say, 3 to 4 years. And it will be another mayor after me, since I'm termed out after another 2.5 years. It's going to be another mayor that sees that through. So you have at least a few years reprieve if you're concerned about that. And I know that we obviously still have obligations to pay off from the last renovation and expansion at the airport, about $1 billion in bonds. We've been very successful in paying those down, and we've got a good plan in place to take care of those for the next couple of years, despite the severe downturn. So I'm not worried about the short-term financial impacts at the airport, though obviously there's a lot of jobs lost that I'm very worried about. Okay, thank you for the question, Tina. There's also a person who's calling in with a phone number ending 8809, if you could. Thank you.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, thanks.
On the Measure B, I just wonder if we got some, that's the quarter cent sales tax revenue measure. Right. And even with the sales tax revenue coming in, it's going to be, considerably reduced. We've been getting about $40 million a year on that. Do we have some flexibility in there that we could maybe target some specific with the shortfall we're going to have coming up? Maybe reassess some of those allocations we going to make, and maybe make some targeted expenditures, alleviate some of the issues with the shortfall.
I think I want to make sure we're talking about the same Measure B. So there's a Measure B passed in 2016, which was the VTA measure. That was a half cent. Then there was a Measure B in 2008 that generated the roughly $40 million you're referring to. That was actually an 8 cent.
Right. This is the quarter cent one, the one for improving police response, emergency response, repairing potholes.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
And there's an oversight committee. We look at that each year on the oversight committee.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is, we got circumstances now that maybe, it's obviously going to be less than 40 million coming in this year.
Yeah.
But maybe target, use some of that money that comes in as a result of that sales tax revenue, and maybe focus it on some issues that, you could see some results by, just making a little better targeting of allocating of those resources.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way, for your service on the oversight. I assume you're also on the Neighborhoods Commission as well, sir?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your service on those commissions.
I'm glad. Thank you to Nicole for speaking up too.
Yeah. Yeah, we got a few commissions online. That's good. So I guess we're always open to the creative ideas of that come up through the commission, but I should probably dampen the optimism a bit by saying the money's pretty well spoken for. That is, we've had that 2016 measure baked in to our allocations now for some time. As you know, the first year allocation went primarily to fire department and roads and higher ahead for the policing. Now with the road money that has come in from measures T and VTA measure B, really that money is shifted almost entirely to public safety. It's really around police and fire. And I think some gang prevention as well, and a little bit of homelessness prevention. So all those dollars were pretty well spoken for. And so there's no, I guess, fair to say, there's no stray revenue that we can now use to backfill. Jim, do I have that fairly accurately described?
Yes, Mayor, correct. So of that quarter, that 1/8% portion of the sales tax, that is part of our general fund revenue. As the oversight committee and the neighborhoods commission has been looking at that, we've been associating that with some certain aligning that with some of the programs that were identified as part of the initial direction as part of the 16-17 budget for police and fire response. So that's how we've been associating that with the oversight committee. But needless to say that as we kind of move forward here with reduced revenue conditions, that's sort of part of the overall general fund picture.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jim. Now I know that we're getting toward almost close to 11:30. So I'm going to ask if anyone has a question or comment. I see 2 people have raised their hand. I can see visually. Please raise your hand now, and we'll close the public comment in just a few minutes. And so if you could raise your hand now, make sure you're in the queue. We want to make sure we get your question and comment. So I just saw someone had their hand raised and took it down. If I don't want to discourage anyone from raising their hand, I actually want to encourage you to raise it now, and then we'll make sure you're in the queue. I have Mr. Cassidy and then Rod Carpenter so far. If anyone else would like to raise their hand, please do so. We'll call first on D. Cassidy. Hi, welcome. Hello. I think your device is still on mute, it appears. So if you could take your device off mute, then we'll be able to hear you. We're still not able to hear you right now. So let me ask you if you could to try to look at the lower left corner of your screen. On most Zoom programs, the mute button will be on the lower left corner. And if you need to do some manipulating there, or alternatively, you want to call in on the phone number, you can go ahead and call in. Let me read that number. Do you have that? Okay, we'll give you that phone number in a moment because it may be a problem with your software or device. What we'll do is we'll move to Rod Carpenter for now. And after we hear from Rod, we'll provide you with a phone number so you can call in. And that way you can have, we can hear you. Okay, so with apologies. Rod Carpenter, welcome. Hi, Rod.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the mayor and council for all the work you're doing on the budget. It's much appreciated. Not a job that I would like to be a part of. I don't see the issue with money because we can all walk in with banks now with a mask on. So that should take care of the money issue.
Understood. Not one I recommend, but I understand.
Yeah. As a past president of Martin Fontana Parks Association, listening to the cuts in the budget, in that department, they sound recreational in nature. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, let me describe. John's actually on the line, so I'll defer to him. But the basic cuts, as I understand it, are several of the programs that relate to a lot of outdoor congregating that we can't really do anyway, like Viva Parks, Viva Calle, and Family Camp, and the aquatics program, and then a reduction of about 1.3 million, really from savings that I think through a lot of great work in the parks team, they're able to generate in reducing water consumption. That I don't believe is going to affect the quality of the parks. It's actually efficiencies that they've got through technology and just better utilization of water. John, did you want to add to that?
No, Mayor, I think you summarized it well. We're just not going to be doing much programming, so there's savings to be had because of that.
I think the issue with the department is that over the years, the number of employees have been cut down to where it's very minimal. And I would hope that it wouldn't be cut anymore.
Yeah, fair point. Let me get to that point in just a moment. I'm just going to interrupt for a moment to make sure that Mr. and Ms. Cassidy has a phone number to call in, because it appears their device is unable to get us access. The phone number is 888-475-4499. Let me read that again, 888-475-4499. And the ID number is 990-0577-1318. Again, 990-0577-1318. And when you get on, just press *9, and that will enable you to pose a question, make a comment. So coming back to you, sir, on the cuts to staff, there's no question that PRNS staff probably took the worst cuts through the Great Recession, and we're very mindful of that. Community centers, I know, dramatically reduced the amount of city staff. We're relying overwhelmingly on now nonprofits for all but I think a dozen of our community centers. I'm not sure there's much I can say other than we're going to do the best we can to hang on to as many of those PRNS staff, because we know that they are at the front line of interaction for thousands of our residents, and so many residents depend on those services. But John, do you want to add anything?
No, Mayor, I think you did a good job. Thanks.
Okay. All right, so we're going to do the best we can, and fortunately, John is a very creative guy, and he's looking for ways to cut dollars without impacting the services directly, and we're going to just keep trying to do that. Obviously, if things get better and we have the benefit of federal money, for example, to backfill holes, we'll be able to ensure we restore more of the services. And obviously, if the economy continues to stay at its current pace, we're going to have to find more cuts. So this is all tentative for now, and we're just going to ask for the patience of everybody as we try to transparently describe what it is we're dealing with here at the city. Hopefully I've given the Cassidy, nope, they have not called in. All right.
Try and meeting again.
Okay. Mr. and Ms. Cassidy, we're going to try you one more time to see if you can unmute on your device. Hopefully you're trying to call in at this time. And anyone else who would like to speak, please feel free to raise your hand, or if you're calling in, just to dial *9. And we're not hearing from you now, so it appears that the device is not quite.
No, they can email me their question.
Okay.
Henry.Smith@SanJose.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Looks like the device isn't going to work. So why don't we ask you to email Henry, who's kind enough to offer his email address. It's henry.smith, common spelling, SMITH, at sanjoseca.gov. Again, henry.smith at sanjoseca.gov. Just send us your question, your comment. We'll be happy to respond through email. I think our last call, or our last questioner, is Jean Dresden. Welcome, Jean.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for taking my call. During the council study session, there was discussion of the next phase in
Hey,
September.
Jean. Hey, Jean, I'm going to stop you here because we're actually not hearing you very well at all. Can I ask you to perhaps?
That a little better?
Yeah, much better. Thank you, Jean.
Okay, I just rotated the phone, so the microphone's in a pod. In the council study session, you talked about the phase 2 or tier 2 cuts coming in September, potentially after you have better forecasts. And in order to have a discussion about that, that meant you've had to ask staff to start thinking what they would do. Have they been given guidance about priorities or direction as they prepare alternate scenarios?
The short answer is no, not in the way that I think you're considering, Jean, which would be specifically direction we'd give about what to do in tier 2. The direction they've got is really from my budget message back in March, where I anticipated, obviously, there need to be significant cuts. So we just tried to set aside about $52 million to try to soften the blow. And so I expect that, you know, the point you raise implicit in your question is a very good one, and one that makes me think that it'd probably be a good idea for us to have this explicit conversation, because honestly, I think our focus has really been as a council in our deliberations so far and our conversations and questions on this first tier of cuts. And I don't think there have been any really significant questions coming in about the second tier. And obviously, we would need to have a whole nother set of public conversations prior to the vote on that second tier in September. So let me take your question and as under advisement as something we would want to consider in the weeks ahead to give some basic direction. Obviously, you probably know, because I know you're savvy and you follow this stuff, there is a set of proposed cuts already in that second tier. The question then is whether council might want to offer a direction different than what's in that proposed set of cuts. And I think it's an important question to raise. So more to come. I'll just say that. I also say, in addition to the economic data that will become more apparent to us in the weeks ahead, for example, as we hear from the state about sales tax revenues and so forth, we're also going to know more from the Federal Treasury Department about how we can use FEMA reimbursements and CARES Act funding and other funding. Those are all going to help us. That information is going to help us make much better decisions in tier 2 as well. So thanks for the question. I think we have exhausted all of the questions. Is that right, Henry? Okay. I want to say,
Mayor, sorry.
Yeah, John, Jim.
Sorry, this is Jim. I just wanted to get back to that question that was asked earlier about neighborhood traffic calming. Just I have a little bit more information.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
So I think, you know, in the traffic capital improvement plan, there's about $2 million there for neighborhood traffic calming type projects. And as part of last year's budget, we had an additional $1 million from the general fund, so that won't be available in 2021. So just like you said earlier, resources are there, just still but at a reduced level.
Right. So it's a general fund money that will be reduced, but the construction tax dollars will be as allocated, obviously at a lower level.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Well, thanks to you, Jim, for all your hard work, and all of the members of the city team that joined us for the call. Thanks to the many members of the community. As always, we have a lot of interest in the community in these very important issues, and we want to continue to engage with you in dialogue, because we know that often you have creative ideas and good suggestions for us to be further exploring as we look to ensure we can tighten the belt without cutting the services that are most critical to our residents. So thank you for your continued engagement. As I mentioned, we will be coming back for more of these online meetings, although we know that they are limited in terms of access, but we're going to do the best we can. On May 18th, if you have any friends or family who speak Spanish, there'll be Spanish translation. That Monday meeting is from 6 to 8, and then Wednesday, May 20th, from 6 to 8, we'll also have translation in Vietnamese. Thank you all for joining us.